for Commission of Inquiry of the 1988 massacre. Yours is.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's truly an honour to be here speaking to you today. My presentation sort of follows the title of the event, but in a bit backwards, starting with the events of 1988, discussing how those horrible events are echoed in the ongoing human rights abuses in the country, and finally how impunity binds the generations in the same painful cycle of repression, arrests, torture and executions. We've already heard much about the 1988 massacre, both of course from the previous speaker, but importantly we also have some very hefty reports, some of which have been mentioned, and I will name them for your convenience. In particular, we have the report by Geoffrey Robertson, who was a member of the UN Internal Justice Council and an enormously respected judge. That report is named The Massacre of Political Prisoners in Iran in 1988. Second, we have the FIDH report, 25 years on and still no justice. 1988 prison executions remain unpunished. Third, we have the two substantial reports, works by Mr. Boumedra, who is here in the room, and JVMI. And finally, we have this new Amnesty report, Amnesty International report from November 2018, called Blood-Soaked Secrets, Why Iran's 1988 Prison Massacre Are Ongoing Crimes Against Humanity. Now, with this body of evidence, we have through these independent and thorough investigations, we have testimonies from hundreds of witnesses, as well as public and leaked confessions by the perpetrators. We have an incomplete but incredibly long and detailed compilations of the victims. Although the exact estimates differ, all accounts speak of many thousands of executions in the space of a few months. I believe the best estimate to be 30,000 of the regime's political opponents executed. We know the exact GPS coordinates of 16 mass graves. I'm sure there are additional mass graves. We also have an extensive list of suspects with accounts of their respective roles in the atrocities. And in short, we know beyond any reasonable doubt that a crime against humanity, including persecution, murders, extermination, and forced disappearances, torture, and other inhumane acts, to take Amnesty's list of the account, was committed. But look at Iran today. You'd have a very hard time arguing that any of these crimes do not happen on a systematic scale also today. Iran executes by far the most persons per capita in the world, including minors, for charges which are clearly political in nature, such as enmity against God. Members of the death commissions are currently holding judicial offices, including the posts of Supreme Court judges, 2 members of Parliament, 7 members of the Assembly of Experts, and 2 members of the Expediency Council are also among the members of the death commissions. Additionally, some of Iran's largest financial and trade institutions are run and controlled by the perpetrators, and the current Minister of Justice, as well as 3 previous Ministers of Justice, all served on the death commissions. Naturally, also Iran's current supreme leader, who was president in 1988, was directly involved in the massacre. You can clearly see how participation in this crime against humanity became a career-making moment for many Iranian officials. Complicity became not something to be ashamed of, but a selection criteria for higher office, and impunity has thus become institutionalized in the country. The perpetrators now permeate every Iranian authority with a hand in the current ongoing abuses. When officials are, so to speak, during their career trained in mass murder of dissidents, mass murder is how they will respond to new protests. As the UN Human Rights Committee has written in the guidance to the Covenant of Civil and Political Rights, indeed the problem of impunity for these violations, a matter of sustained concern by the committee, may well be an important contributing element in the recurrence of the violations. The document also states, as with failure to investigate, failure to bring to justice perpetrators of such violations could in and of itself give rise to a separate breach of the Covenant. As such, we should understand impunity both as a cause of human rights violations and a violation in and of itself. So what should the international response to impunity be? Most UN documents that discuss impunity do so in the context of transitional justice. There is perhaps good reason for that. As the International Crisis Group writes, the pursuit of international justice for perpetrators of atrocity crimes necessarily has political implications, from shifting the balance of power within a country to requiring other states to cooperate when doing so may adversely affect their own interests. The UN might therefore be right that ending impunity requires broader political change. It requires transition to a new system. But I would argue that there is still a role for the UN and the international human rights community to highlight the need for ending impunity, even if transitional justice is not currently ongoing, even if ending impunity would have wide-ranging political implications. The Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights writes, combating impunity and promoting accountability and the rule of law is a challenging area in which sustainable progress requires long-term, sustained efforts and resources. Institutional transformation can take at least a generation, even for rapidly transforming countries. And this is where the major challenge here at the UN materializes. Consistency across time and across human rights mechanisms and procedures is consistently lacking. Just to give you an example, in March of this year, Iran was appointed to the UN Women's Rights Committee to judge complaints of women's rights violations. The day after, women's rights lawyer Nasrin Sotoudeh was convicted in Iran to 38 years in prison and 140 lashes for protecting women and representing them. 6 special rapporteurs recently wrote a common letter condemning Iran for lengthy prison sentences for women protesting against compulsory veiling. On the specific issue of the 1988 massacre and impunity, this is already, as we've heard, been dropped by the transition between special rapporteurs. One hand of the human rights system does not know or seem to care what the other hand does. This allows Iran to exploit differences, choose the path of least resistance, and apparently avoid responsibility. In contrast, and as the Chair mentioned, the UPR system, the Universal Periodic Review, is designed to ensure that issues are not dropped and that states have to return to issues raised during previous cycles. However, the UPR system does not seem to be very conducive to impunity issues. In the UPR info database, 40 other issues have seen more recommendations from member states, despite impunity being key to non-recurrence to many, if not most, of those other issues. In Iran's case, only 2 UPR recommendations, one per cycle, on impunity have been given. Neither of them were accepted by Iran, of course. I believe a useful way forward is provided in the 2014 report by the Special Rapporteur on the Promotion of Truth, Justice and Guarantees of Non-Recurrence. This report describes prosecutorial prioritization. In it, the Special Rapporteur calls for strategies that start by tackling the systemic dimensions of violations, so as to dismantle the web of players and structures that enabled the atrocities to take place, and crucially including identifications of chains of command. In the case of the 1988 massacre, that chain of command went through a fatwa, a direct edict by the supreme leader, which circumvented normal judicial procedure. So, in conclusion, and from that, my recommendations to member states concerning the UPR process, and in order to ensure consistency needed to end impunity, are the following. In the end, we want to launch a commission of inquiry. But for that to happen, we need the UN to fire on all cylinders, so to speak. So I call on member states to discuss the 1988 case with the Special Rapporteur on Iran to make sure the issue is not dropped again. And I urge them to give UPR recommendations to investigate the killing of 1988 and subsequent waves of arrest, torture, and extrajudicial killings, because failure to investigate is, as stated by the Covenant, also a crime which must be highlighted. They should be captured by the UPR process. I urge them also to give UPR recommendations that require Iran to guarantee the safety and well-being of those seeking truth and justice for their family members that were victims of the 1988 prison massacre. Finally, I recommend member states to give UPR recommendations to the effect of removing the supreme leader's ability to issue extrajudicial killing orders via a fatwa. Go at the source. Thank you, Madam Chair.